Thanks for clicking on this video. My name is Caleb. I would like to discuss something that I have been thinking about for quite a while. It's an argument for the rationality for the belief in God, for theism. And the argument primarily argues for its rationality over atheism from a platonic metaphysics, and some people are not convinced by that, but I'll get into that later. But as of right now, I want to just lay a little bit of groundwork here and explain some things about, where I'm coming from with regards to epistemology first. And I want to point out that at least some atheistic epistemologies, namely the sort of scientism and new atheist types, tend to fall into a kind of self-refuting epistemology, I think. And how that goes is sometimes they'll say things like, we ought not to let faith inform our worldview, or something like that, that faith cannot be something that gets us to the truth, something along those lines. And when you press them on this, what they mean by faith, oftentimes they will say something like what I've said, or maybe they won't say this exactly, but I don't think that they would disagree with this particular definition that I have laid out here. Faith equals belief which is unjustified, or belief in that which is unjustified, belief without evidence, something along those lines. I don't think that the average atheist would disagree with that. And so you might think, well, that seems reasonable, and on face value it might be, but it kind of causes a problem when we bring this into here. So Agrippa's trilemma is a problem that was created by a guy called Agrippa. He was a first century Pyrrhonist philosopher. And essentially how it goes is, if I have a proposition, and that proposition is proposition A. Proposition A, someone can just say, why do you believe proposition A? And I'll say, well, I believe proposition A because of proposition B. And then that proposition also requires justification. And then you'll say, well, I believe proposition B because of proposition C. And this can have three different outcomes. And I don't think that there's any getting out of this problem for absolute epistemic justification. That would be, you can do circular reasoning. I believe proposition A because of proposition B. I believe proposition B because of proposition C. I believe proposition C because of proposition A. That's one result of this line of reasoning. The other one would be an infinite regress. And I guess you cannot have just an infinite regress. You can't have an infinite number of beliefs, and that just kind of doesn't work out. And then most people go with just having a sort of foundational set of beliefs that they go with, and that's what they do. And this really is just sort of arbitrarily chosen. You can just arbitrarily choose any number of beliefs that you want to have as the sort of foundation once you accept this. And that's a problem with foundationalism, is some people that are either coherentists tend to make that argument, is it ends up being arbitrary. And both of those kind of do have problems, being one circular, the other one arbitrary. So, if that is the case, then we have a problem with having absolute epistemic certainty and justification for our foundational beliefs. If so, then, if we accept this definition of faith, then we have a problem with a new atheist or scientism person, naive empiricism, something like that. They essentially are refuting themselves because either they don't have any beliefs at all, or they do have beliefs and some of them are unjustified. Hence, that would be faith. So, at least some atheist epistemologies appear to be self-refuting. That doesn't necessarily mean that all of them are. You could potentially have one that isn't, but some of them appear to be. Does that mean that we can't rationally evaluate worldviews? No, we can. And how that might go is we have certain criterion that we can use. That would be namely coherence, parsimony, and intuition. How easily they fit into our human intuitions. Those are ways that we can use to evaluate different worldviews. And so, understanding that, I will briefly now go on to make a case for Platonism. Now then, this video is not really meant to make a case for Platonism. It's mainly for the argument for rationality of theism over atheism, but I'm not going to ignore that aspect because that is a big aspect of it. I'll just briefly give two arguments. One is the indispensability argument. So how this goes, just give you the premises and the conclusion. Basically, premise one, we ought to be ontologically committed to all objects that are indispensable to our best scientific theories. Premise two, mathematical objects are indispensable to our best scientific theories. Conclusion, we ought to be ontologically committed to mathematical objects. Okay? Now then, second one's a little bit less concise, but I think it's still an interesting one. I'll just try and walk through it a little bit. The Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Lots of atheists will sometimes, or nominalists or something like that, will cite this as being evidence against mathematical realism. But Kurt Gödel himself was actually a lifelong Platonist, so he certainly didn't think it that way, and in fact he actually, as far as I understand it, believed it was a good demonstration that Platonism is true. Essentially, we have certain mathematical propositions that we know are demonstrably true. Now then, our axiomatic systems about mathematics, when they try to get all of those propositions, those true propositions, under their system, the system collapses. It becomes incoherent. So if that's the case, then that shows us, according to Gödel, that the truths of mathematics are independent of any of our constructed human systems about mathematics. So if that is the case, then that would seem to be evidence that, mathematical constructivism is false and mathematical Platonism is true. Okay. Now then, maybe you were convinced by that, maybe you weren't. That's just something to, think about while I go into the rest of this argument. So, since I have the groundwork laid out, I'll just go ahead and explain here. Alright, so, going back to the criterion I mentioned, coherence, parsimony, and intuition. Alright. So, supposing that Platonism is true, or supposing that you happen to be a Platonist, maybe you just happen to believe it, then there's good reason to favor a theistic explanation rather than an atheistic one. So, see, these are two different belief systems, let's say. Let's say both of these are equally coherent. But both of them have a Platonic worldview. Well then, we need to look at the foundations, because right here, let's say we have the atheistic one on this side, this is the theistic one. We have the Platonic dualism of, the material and the abstract. Over here, material, immaterial. So the immaterial abstract objects are, obviously, they're not material, they're not causal, they're acausal. This is what constitutes abstract objects. So it seems as though these two things are very much unrelated, or it's very hard to relate them. And so we can either, presuppose these things and just leave it at that, as being two brute facts that we then use to construct our worldview. Or you could, posit some kind of explanation, but it would seem very difficult to maintain your atheism and provide a concise, parsimonious explanation. Let's go here to Occam's razor. Now then, this would be a formulation of Occam's razor that, again, I don't think that most atheists would disagree with. Say you have a choice between two hypotheses of equal explanatory power, we should favor the one with the fewest presuppositions. Okay? Understanding that, under an atheist Platonism, we would have to be forced to presuppose as brute facts the sort of origin of the universe and the material world and material matter, and then these abstract objects seem just kind of as an add-on, something that you could have without, but if you're going to construct your worldview, you have to presuppose these in order to construct this. Whereas a theist, it's only necessary that they presuppose one entity to explain both the existence of Platonic forms and numbers and mathematics existing in the mind of God, and then he, as the creator of the material universe, be the explanation for that. So we have so if they are both coherent systems, we have a more parsimonious explanation over here, because there's only one necessary entity to presuppose within the theistic framework. But the atheistic Platonist has to presuppose two types of entities. And just to sort of supplement this point, I'll just go into some intuition points. It is true that human beings have a natural sort of religious instinct. I have some information here. Okay, so I'll go and cite a few things here. ScienceDaily.com, this is just from there. Humans predisposed to believe in gods and an afterlife. Little article here. Studies by Emily Reed Burdett and Justin Barrett from the University of Oxford suggest that children below the age of 5 find it easier to believe in some superhuman properties than to understand similar human limitations. And then there's a second point here. Experiments involving adults conducted by Jingzhou and from Tsinghua University, China, and Natalie Emmons and Jesse Baring from the Queen's University, Belfast, suggest that people across many different cultures instinctively believe that some part of their mind, soul, or spirit lives on after death. The studies demonstrate that people are natural dualists, finding it easy to conceive of the separation of the mind and the body. Okay. And this is from the oxfordstudents.com. This is that study that they had mentioned here. Joanna Kozlowski, an international research project directed by Oxford academics, has this week concluded that humans are naturally predisposed to believe in gods and an afterlife. Evidence suggests that both theology and atheism are responses to basic impulse rooted in human thought processes regardless of cultural background. The project, led by psychologist Dr. Justin Barrett from the Oxford Centre for Anthropology and Mind, involved over 50 academics from around the world and included studies of both traditionally religious and atheist societies. It drew on various disciplines including anthropology, psychology, philosophy, and theology. And here we go. We also have a study by Paul Bloom of the Department of Psychology, Yale University. Religion is natural. And his conclusion here is that there are some basic human intuitions. We have a common sense dualism, is what he calls it. The claim explored here is considerably stronger. It is the idea that we think of bodies and souls as distinct. We implicitly endorse a strong substance dualism of the sort defended by philosophers like Plato and Descartes. So, Platonism also seems to be a natural human intuition. And here, what we might call a promiscuous teleology is also something that he explores here, that we have a natural tendency to think of the universe as designed. And here is one other study that he cites as well. Other research finds that when children are directly asked about the origin of animals and people, they tend to prefer explanations that involve an intentional creator, even if adults who raise them do not. That's Evans, 2000-2001. So humans are natural teleological thinkers. Naturally think in terms of design, and design implies designer. So in terms of coherence, parsimony, and intuition, it would seem we have good reason to favor a theistic explanation over and above an atheistic one, supposing Platonism is true. And even if I haven't found one, you are able to have an atheistic explanation that was somehow able to explain both of these things with only one presupposed entity, we would still have reasons to favor theism because of intuitions. As I said above, if we have two equally coherent systems and two equally parsimonious systems, we can't really have any means to actually differentiate and find a superior one. The only thing that we can really do in that situation is make a sort of gut intuition decision, choice on which one to favor. And theism supports human intuitions as opposed to atheism, which seems contrary to human intuitions. So even if there was a parsimonious explanation for these, which I don't know that there is, I haven't found one, but perhaps there is, so this is a hypothetical, we would still have reason for favoring theism as having a better rational warrant considering the human mind. Alright. That should about do it. Thank you for listening.